Vanish from here, you worthless elder. As far as I'm concerned, you will not return to these premises. Depart my home instantly. Jennifer bellowed, her countenance marred by intense anger. I maintained my composure, meeting her gaze directly, and uttered, "Attempt to force my departure." She lunged at me with great ferocity, but my son, Richard, seized her arms before she could strike. I reached for my phone to contact law enforcement, but Jennifer smacked the device from my grasp, sending it sailing across the area. "You won't contact authorities. You are simply exiting," she screamed. I exited the residence feeling disgraced, yet resolute. That youthful individual had no clue that the dwelling she shared with my son was, in actual fact, my rightful asset. Moreover, I had already discerned her true identity. If you are viewing this, please subscribe and indicate your location. My name is Margaret Watson. I am 73 years of age, and my son, Richard, never truly matured. Lacking his father's presence, who passed away during Richard's youth, he developed emotional reliance on me. At 35, he had attempted various business ventures that met with complete failure, placing me in multiple financial predicaments. I consistently overlooked his setbacks, believing he might just need more time. During his most recent financial crisis, when eviction seemed imminent, I decided to allow him to reside in one of my residences, a property I typically leased out, which formed a significant portion of my monthly earnings. I requested the occupants vacate the premises and provided the keys to my son, without disclosing that the house was legally registered in my name. We also maintained a shared banking fund, holding a portion of the life insurance payout from his father, our emergency reserve. My shoulders drooped as I drove away from the house, tears flowing freely. Jennifer's self-satisfied look was etched into my memory. My own offspring had stood silently as this female, this complete stranger, subjected me to humiliation within what was, in reality, my own abode. My hands quivered on the steering wheel, yet, beneath the pain, a spark of resolve began to ignite. I was not some frail older woman who would simply yield and accept such treatment. I had survived my husband's passing, raised a child alone, and managed my finances prudently enough to acquire several properties. This young woman had no idea the formidable opponent she faced. At my own house, I collapsed onto my sofa, feeling the day's burdens pressing heavily upon me. For 2 years, Richard had occupied that dwelling with no significant alterations in his conduct or aspirations. Then, quite unexpectedly, I received an extremely enthusiastic phone call from him. "Mother, I need you to meet someone truly special." I felt hopeful, yet remained cautious. At the eatery, I barely recognized my own son. He was immaculately dressed, freshly shaven, with a new hairstyle, smiling and exuding confidence, a surprising metamorphosis. Jennifer Stevens was strikingly beautiful and captivating, but something about her unsettled me from our initial encounter. During our discussion, I had a strong intuition that I had encountered her visage previously. "Haven't we met?" I inquired, observing a fleeting moment of unease in her gaze. She swiftly changed the topic, explaining her past work as a model in some television advertisements. The meal concluded pleasantly, but I departed with an unsettling feeling. In the following weeks, I noted troubling alterations. Richard sold his old vehicle, a sentimental keepsake from his father. When questioned, he explained he was investing in digital ventures with Jennifer, who he claimed was an online startup expert. The recollection of that initial dinner caused a knot in my gut. I should have trusted my intuition from the start, but it was not too late. I rose from the sofa, my back straightening with renewed determination. Jennifer had no conception of what was about to unfold. The morning after Jennifer expelled me, I marched into my bank with a resolve I hadn't experienced in years. The young teller's eyes widened as I placed my identification firmly on the counter. "I need to close a joint financial account immediately," I stated, my voice steady despite the fury churning within me. "And I need to speak with the mortgage division." 2 hours later, I emerged with the shared account terminated, and the funds moved to a new account solely in my name. I had also initiated the official removal process for my real estate. My son and his cherished Jennifer would soon discover the repercussions of challenging Margaret Watson. My phone rang ceaselessly that afternoon. Richard called 17 consecutive times. I allowed it to ring. For once, he would await my response. When I finally answered on the 18th attempt, his tone was frantic. "Mother, what have you done? The bank reports our account is empty." "Not empty." "Richard." "Transferred." My voice sounded unfamiliar to me, cool and assured. "That money was partly my retirement savings, not a plaything for your girlfriend's ventures." "You can't do this," he yelled, panic creeping into his words. "We have payments due." "Jennifer's startup requires Jennifer's startup," I interjected. "Does not exist. And regarding what I can and cannot do, you will find the eviction notification affixed to my front entrance tomorrow morning." The silence on the other end was profound. When Richard eventually spoke, his voice had diminished to a whisper. "But this is our dwelling." "No, Richard. It is my property, legally and completely. I never transferred the ownership to you." My heart ached at the shock in his voice, but I continued. "You have 30 days to locate a new place to reside." Jennifer's piercing voice cut through the background. "Let me speak with her." There was a brief struggle. Then her poisonous tone filled my ear. "You malicious old sorceress. You can't just—" "I just did. I cut her off. And Jennifer, I have seen your face before. I am recalling where and when I do. You will regret ever stepping into my house." I ended the call, my hand trembling, but my resolve unshaken. That night, I slept very little. Instead, I retrieved my laptop and commenced my investigation. Jennifer's face had activated something in my memory. Perhaps a news report, or a caution shared by acquaintances. I could not place it yet, but I knew its significance. The next morning, Richard appeared at my threshold, his face looking worn. "Mother, please," he implored. "You cannot do this to us. Jennifer is devastated." I invited him inside, but remained standing, maintaining a position of authority. "I am not doing anything to you, Richard. I am safeguarding what is mine, what is ours. The funds your father left were for our security, not for Jennifer's schemes. Her business concepts are legitimate," he insisted, but uncertainty had entered his voice. "Are they?" I inquired softly. "Then why did the bank notify me of unusual activity? Multiple large withdrawals to overseas accounts? Tell me, son, have you seen any business proposals? Met any of her associates? Seen any products?" His silence was my answer. For the first time, doubt crossed his features. "She loves me," he finally stated. But the words sounded empty. "Does she love you, or what she believes you possess?" I asked, my voice softer now. "Consider, Richard. How did she react when she learned the money was gone? Was her concern for you or for the funds?" He departed without answering, shoulders slumped in a posture I recognized too well. The same defeated stance he had adopted after each business failure. But this time, I would not immediately rescue him. Sometimes people need to experience the results of their choices before they can develop. Back at my computer, I resumed my search, with renewed determination. Jennifer's face haunted me, and I knew I had encountered it previously. Somewhere important, somewhere that would clarify everything. On the third day of my inquiry, I found it. The memory that had been persistently bothering me suddenly became clear as I browsed a local news archive. There she was, Jennifer Stevens. Except in the article, she was identified as Jessica Simmons. The headline declared, "Local man loses life savings to romance swindler." My hands shook as I clicked on the story. The account was painfully familiar. Jessica had targeted a susceptible man in his 40s, isolated him from his family, persuaded him to invest in non-existent commercial ventures, and vanished once his accounts were empty. The article included warnings from law enforcement about a series of similar incidents across 3 states. "I knew it," I whispered, printing the article along with several others I discovered featuring the same woman under different aliases. I organized them carefully in a folder, adding bank statements showing the questionable withdrawals from the joint account. When I attempted to call Richard, my calls went directly to voicemail. I drove to my house, the one they were occupying, only to find the drapes closed and no one answering the door. My neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, approached me as I was about to depart. "They moved out last night," she informed me, concern etched on her kind face. "Packed a van around midnight. I thought you should be aware." "Your son appeared dreadful, Margaret. As if he hadn't slept in days." My heart sank. "Did you observe their direction or hear anything about their potential destination?" Mrs. Calloway shook her head. "Nothing specific, but the woman, Jennifer, was on the phone arguing with someone about flight schedules." Flight schedules? They were escaping, or, rather, Jennifer was escaping, taking my emotionally vulnerable son with her. I thanked Mrs. Calloway and drove directly to the police station. Officer Reynolds listened patiently as I presented my evidence. The news reports, identifying Jennifer as a known scammer, the bank records, the property deed proving my ownership of the house. I explained how she had isolated my son and was now potentially fleeing with whatever funds she had managed to extract from him. "She has done this before," I insisted, pushing the news articles toward him. "She targets susceptible men, drains them financially, then disappears. My son is at risk, perhaps not physically, but certainly emotionally and financially." Officer Reynolds nodded, reviewing the documents. "You've conducted excellent investigative work, Mrs. Watson. We can file a fraud complaint and issue an alert for both of them, but you should understand your son is an adult if he is willingly traveling with her." "He doesn't know who she truly is," I interrupted, my voice faltering for the first time. "Please, he is all I possess." Something in my expression must have resonated with him. "I will expedite this," he promised, "and I will contact the fraud division immediately. They have resources for tracing these types of swindlers." As I exited the station, my phone rang. An unidentified number. I answered hesitantly. "Mother." Richard's voice was barely audible. "I need assistance." My legs nearly buckled with relief. "Where are you? Are you safe?" "Airport, hotel," he mumbled. "She is gone." Mother took my wallet, my identification, everything. Said she was getting coffee and never returned. I gripped the phone tighter, torn between satisfaction and profound sadness for my son. "Stay there. I am coming to retrieve you." "Which airport?" "International. Terminal C. Hotel." His voice cracked. "You were correct about her. I should have listened." "We will discuss that later," I stated firmly. "Just remain in place." In the car, I contacted Officer Reynolds to update him, then concentrated on the road ahead. My son required me, and despite everything, I would be there for him. But this time, circumstances would be different. This time, there would be boundaries. What Jennifer had not anticipated was that she hadn't merely defrauded a gullible man. She had challenged a mother who would stop at nothing to safeguard her child and all she had diligently worked for. The airport hotel lobby was bustling with travelers, but I immediately noticed Richard hunched in a corner chair. He appeared diminished somehow, smaller. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothing disheveled. When he saw me, his face collapsed like a child's. I did not rush to embrace him. Instead, I sat in the chair, opposite his, and waited. "She took everything," he finally said, gazing at his hands. "The emergency cash you always advised me to keep in my sock drawer. Father's timepiece. She even made me withdraw the maximum from my credit cards yesterday, claiming we needed cash for a business venture that couldn't wait." I nodded, maintaining a neutral expression, despite the fury boiling within me. "And now you comprehend her true nature." Richard looked up, his eyes brimming with tears. "How did you know, Mother? How did you perceive her deception when I could not?" "Because I was not blinded by what I wished to perceive," I said simply. "Now we must report your stolen identification and cancel those credit cards immediately." For the next 3 hours, we worked, filing police reports, contacting credit card companies, placing fraud alerts on his accounts. With each call, Richard's shoulders straightened a little more, as if shedding the burden of his denial. Officer Reynolds met us at the police station, bringing the fraud division investigator assigned to the matter. Detective Martinez listened intently as Richard described Jennifer's manipulative tactics, how she had isolated him from friends and family, how she had pressured him to invest in various schemes. "She has perfected it," Detective Martinez remarked grimly. "You are not her initial victim, Mr. Watson, and you will not be her final one unless we apprehend her. The positive news is your mother's evidence provides a strong basis, and your testimony adds vital specifics about her current appearance, methods, and potential whereabouts." As Richard signed his declaration, I stepped outside for fresh air. The afternoon sun felt warm on my face, a small comfort amidst the disarray. My phone vibrated with a message from Mrs. Calloway. "Maintenance man checked house. Some damage inside, mainly bedroom and living room. Another mess to tidy up, but at least my son was secure. And the house, my house, remained mine." When Richard joined me outside, something in his demeanor had shifted. His posture was more erect, his gaze more direct. "I wish to assist in catching her," he stated firmly, "not just for myself, but for whoever she might target next." Pride swelled in my chest, but I tempered it with caution. "That is commendable, Richard. But your primary concern needs to be rebuilding your own life." "I know," he nodded. "And I know I cannot remain with you. I need to become self-reliant for once." These were the words I had waited decades to hear. I allowed myself a faint smile. "There is a studio apartment above Mrs. Calloway's garage. It is modest, but it is a beginning. I will take it," he said without hesitation. "And Mother, I am sorry. Not just about Jennifer, but about everything. All the years of depending on you, taking advantage." I touched his arm gently. "We will have time for all that. Right now, let us concentrate on ensuring Jennifer does not do this to anyone else." As we drove back to my home, Richard stared thoughtfully out the window. "Do you know what is ironic?" he finally asked. "She always ridiculed your old-fashioned habits. How you kept paper bank statements. How you clipped news stories. How you remembered faces. In the end, that is what exposed her." I could not help but smile. Never underestimate an older woman with a sharp memory. "Richard, we have witnessed too much to be easily deceived." For the first time in days, he laughed, a genuine sound that dissipated some of the tension between us. Jennifer had taken much from him, but perhaps in the process, she had granted him something valuable, an opportunity to finally mature. 3 weeks after Jennifer's disappearance, Detective Martinez called with an update. "We have her, Mrs. Watson, Jessica Simmons, or Jennifer Stevens, as your son knew her, was apprehended in Phoenix attempting to open bank accounts with stolen identification." Relief washed over me. Will Richard need to give evidence eventually? Yes. Her pattern of deception spans state lines, so federal charges are probable. Your son's situation will be one of several the prosecutor will present. I thanked him and immediately contacted Richard at his new employment, a humble position at a local bookstore that provided enough to cover his rent for Mrs. Calloway's studio apartment. "They caught her," I announced when he answered. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "I should feel pleased," he finally responded. "But mostly I just feel foolish. You were manipulated by a professional deceiver, Richard. She has done this multiple times." "Still," he sighed, "I permitted her to come between us. I believed her when she stated you were controlling me, restricting me. I even believed her when she claimed you falsified those news articles." I swallowed hard, recalling the accusations he had directed at me before Jennifer's true nature was revealed. "What matters is that you perceive the truth now." After work, Richard came over for dinner, our new weekly ritual. As we ate, I observed subtle changes in him. How he maintained eye contact during conversation. How he inquired about my life instead of discussing only his own difficulties. How he insisted on washing dishes afterward. "I have been contemplating," he said as he dried a plate. "I want to meet her other victims." The plate nearly slipped from my grasp. "Why would you wish to do that?" "Because I am not the sole person rebuilding a life she ruined. Perhaps we could support each other." His expression was sincere, determined. Detective Martinez mentioned, "There is a support group. Individuals who have been defrauded. Not just by Jennifer, but by others like her." I studied my son's face, seeing something new there. Empathy, perhaps, or a desire to transform his suffering into purpose. "I think that is a wonderful notion. Would you accompany me?" The request surprised me, for it was the first time. For years, I had been inserting myself into his existence, offering unrequested assistance and counsel. Now, he was seeking my support. "Of course. I will." The following Tuesday, we sat in a community center meeting room with 8 other individuals, men and women of various ages, all victims of romantic deceptions. As each person shared their narrative, I watched Richard's face, saw recognition and solace as he realized he was not isolated in his ordeal. When his moment came, he spoke clearly and honestly about his vulnerabilities, how Jennifer had exploited them, and what he was discovering about himself in the aftermath. The most challenging part, he admitted, was accepting that my mother had been right all along. She saw through Jennifer immediately, but I was too stubborn to heed her. An older man across the circle nodded understandingly. "My daughter tried to warn me, too. It took me losing my retirement funds to finally listen to her." After the gathering, Richard was quiet on the drive home. When we pulled into his driveway, he turned to me with an intensity I had not witnessed before. "I am going to provide testimony against Jennifer," he stated firmly, "and I am going to continue attending those meetings. I believe this might be the first truly significant accomplishment of my life." My heart swelled with a fresh kind of pride, not the anxious hope I had felt during his many failed endeavors, but genuine admiration for his bravery and development. "Richard," I said carefully, "I have always believed you possessed the capacity to achieve something meaningful with your life. I am merely sorry it required this experience to reveal it." He shook his head. "Do not be sorry, Mother. For the first time, I am not sorry either. Jennifer thought she was destroying me, but instead she might have rescued me from myself." As I observed him walk to his apartment, head held high, shoulders squared, I realized Jennifer had underestimated both of us. She had perceived an easily manipulated man and his intrusive mother. She had failed to recognize a fighter who simply needed the appropriate challenge, or the woman who had nurtured him to eventually discover his inner strength. 6 weeks after Jennifer's apprehension, Detective Martinez telephoned with news. "We have her, Mrs. Watson. Jessica Simmons, or Jennifer Stevens, as your son knew her, was arrested in Phoenix attempting to establish bank accounts with stolen identification." Relief surged through me. Will Richard need to give evidence ultimately? Yes. Her pattern of fraud crosses state boundaries, so federal indictments are probable. Your son's matter will be one of several the prosecutor will present. I thanked him and promptly called Richard at his new workplace, a modest position at a local bookstore that paid enough to cover his rent for Mrs. Calloway's studio apartment. "They caught her," I declared when he answered. The silence on the other end said everything without words. "I should feel pleased," he finally responded. "But mostly I just feel foolish. You were manipulated by a skilled con artist, Richard. She has done this numerous times." "Still," he sighed, "I allowed her to create division between us. I believed her when she claimed you were controlling me, holding me back. I even believed her when she said you fabricated those news articles." I swallowed hard, remembering the accusations he had hurled at me before Jennifer's true character was exposed. "What matters is that you perceive the truth now." After work, Richard came over for dinner, our new weekly custom. As we ate, I observed subtle changes in him, how he maintained eye contact during conversation, how he asked questions about my life, instead of talking solely about his troubles, how he insisted on washing dishes afterward. "I have been thinking," he said as he dried a plate. "I want to meet her other victims." The plate nearly slipped from my fingers. "Why would you wish to do that?" "Because I am not the only one rebuilding a life she shattered. Perhaps we could assist each other." His expression was earnest, determined. Detective Martinez stated, "There is a support group. People who have been scammed, not just by Jennifer, but by others like her. I studied my son's face, seeing something new there, perhaps empathy, or a desire to transform his pain into purpose. I think that is a wonderful notion. Would you accompany me? This request surprised me, coming for the first time. For years, I had been interjecting myself into his existence, offering unprompted help and guidance. Now, he was requesting my support. Of course, I will. The following Tuesday, we sat in a community center meeting room with 8 other individuals, men and women of various ages, all victims of romantic deception. As each person shared their narrative, I watched Richard's face, saw recognition and relief as he realized he was not alone in his experience. When his turn arrived, he spoke clearly and honestly about his vulnerabilities, how Jennifer had exploited them, and what he was learning about himself in the aftermath. The most difficult part, he confessed, was accepting that my mother had been right all along. She saw through Jennifer instantly, but I was too stubborn to heed. An older man across the circle nodded knowingly. My daughter attempted to warn me too. It took me losing my retirement funds to finally hear her. After the meeting, Richard was quiet on the journey home. When we pulled into his driveway, he turned to me with an intensity I had not previously observed. "I am going to testify against Jennifer," he said firmly, "and I am going to keep attending those meetings. I believe this might be the first truly important thing I have ever accomplished." My heart swelled with a fresh sense of pride, not the anxious hope I had felt during his many failed ventures, but genuine admiration for his courage and personal growth. "Richard," I said carefully, "I have always believed you possessed the ability to do something significant with your existence. I am merely sorry it required this ordeal to bring it forth." He shook his head. "Do not be sorry, Mother. For the first time, I am not sorry either. Jennifer thought she was destroying me, but instead she might have saved me from myself." As I watched him walk to his apartment, head erect, shoulders squared, I realized Jennifer had underestimated both of us. She had seen an easily manipulated male and his interfering parent. She had failed to recognize a fighter who merely needed the proper conflict, or the woman who had guided him to eventually find his fortitude. 6 weeks after Jennifer's arrest, Richard and I sat in a federal prosecutor's office downtown. Mrs. Patel, the assistant U.S. attorney managing the proceedings, spread photographs across her desk. Different women, all bearing Jennifer's likeness, but with various hairstyles, colors, and assumed names. "We have connected her to 7 distinct frauds in 4 states," Mrs. Patel clarified. "What makes your case particularly valuable, Mr. Watson, is that your mother meticulously preserved evidence." Richard glanced at me with new respect. "She has always been thorough." "Thorough is an understatement." Mrs. Patel smiled. "The bank statements, the news articles, the property documents. It is a prosecutor's ideal scenario." Pride straightened my posture. For years, Richard had ridiculed my meticulous organization, my filing cabinets filled with important papers, my insistence on maintaining records. Now those very habits were aiding in bringing a criminal to justice. "There is something else," Mrs. Patel continued, her expression becoming serious. "We discovered evidence that Jennifer Jessica was planning something larger with you, Richard. Notes in her hotel room implied she was pushing for marriage." Richard paled. "She had been hinting about it recently. Said we should do it quickly, elope somewhere romantic. Once married, she could have legally accessed far more of your assets, and potentially your mother's as well," Mrs. Patel explained. "She was playing a longer game with you than with her previous victims." The thought sent shivers down my spine. How near had we come to catastrophe? If I had not recognized her? If I had not acted swiftly? "When is the trial?" I asked, pushing away the grim thoughts. "That is the other reason I summoned you, Mrs. Patel replied. "Jessica's legal counsel has approached us about a plea bargain. She will plead guilty to multiple fraud charges and disclose information about a broader network of scammers she is associated with, in exchange for a somewhat reduced penalty." Richard leaned forward. What does that imply for us? It means no trial. You would still provide victim impact statements for the sentencing hearing, but you would not have to testify about every detail in open court. Richard and I exchanged glances. The relief on his face was evident. I will do whatever helps ensure she is imprisoned, he stated firmly. But I admit not having to confront her in a prolonged trial would be simpler. As we departed the prosecutor's office, Richard suggested we walk through the nearby park rather than heading directly to the car. It was a beautiful autumn day, the trees ablaze with vibrant colors. For several minutes, we strolled in comfortable silence. You know what I realized in there? Richard finally said. If you had not been so utterly yourself, we might have lost everything. Your keen attention to detail, your insistence on maintaining records, your stubbornness, all the qualities that sometimes drove me to distraction, they saved us. I chuckled softly. Well, being underestimated certainly has its benefits. Jennifer perceived an intrusive older woman. She never considered I might be a formidable adversary. Richard stopped walking and turned to face me. I underestimated you too, Mother. For years, I viewed your assistance as I do not know meddling or exertion of control. I never recognized it as strength. The words warmed me more than the autumn sun. We both made errors, Richard. I probably did foster your reliance for too long. He nodded thoughtfully. The support group has helped me understand that. How sometimes love can appear as helping, but actually cause harm in the long term. We continued walking, and Richard pointed to a bench overlooking a small pond. Let us sit for a moment. As we watched ducks glide across the water, Richard cleared his throat. I have been contemplating Father's insurance money. What remains of it, anyway? My chest tightened. Was he going to request more financial aid even now? I want you to utilize it for yourself, he continued, surprising me. Travel, hobbies, whatever you have postponed while assisting me all these years. I am self-sufficient now, Mother, truly. Tears welled in my eyes, and I blinked them away. And that is generous of you, Richard. It is not generosity. It is simply finally correct. He squeezed my hand. Jennifer believed she was destroying us. Instead, she compelled us to reconstruct something superior. Looking at my son's profile, so similar to his father's, but now with a maturity I had waited decades to witness, I realized he was right. From the remnants of Jennifer's deceit, something unforeseen had emerged. The relationship we should have possessed all along. The day of Jessica Simmons's sentencing hearing arrived with a crisp December chill. Richard and I dressed meticulously. I, in a tailored navy suit I had acquired specifically for this event. Richard in a charcoal gray ensemble that made him appear older, more substantial. You look formidable, Mother, he commented, as we pulled into the courthouse parking area. I smoothed my jacket, feeling the unfamiliar confidence of someone who had confronted a threat and emerged victorious. I feel formidable, I admitted. The courtroom was more congested than I had anticipated. Mrs. Patel had informed us that several of Jessica's other victims would be present, but I had not expected the media attention. Apparently, the case had touched a raw nerve. Elder fraud and romance scams were escalating issues, and our narrative had resonated with the public. We took our seats in the front row. Mrs. Patel nodded reassuringly from her table, then returned to reviewing her notes. The bailiff called for us to rise as the judge entered, and the proceedings commenced with formal introductions and case summaries. And then she was there, Jessica Simmons, escorted by court officials. She looked smaller, somehow, less glamorous in her navy jumpsuit. Her previously immaculate hair now tied back in a simple ponytail. For a brief instant, our eyes met across the courtroom. I did not avert my gaze. I wanted her to see me clearly, to recognize the woman she had so gravely misjudged. The judge reviewed the plea agreement, then invited victim impact statements. An elderly gentleman spoke first, his voice trembling as he described how Jessica had stripped him of his retirement savings and his self-respect. A middle-aged woman followed, explaining how the deception had left her not only financially ruined, but unable to trust again. When Richard's turn came, he walked to the podium with steady steps. His voice, once hesitant, now rang clear in the quiet courtroom. Jessica Simmons did not just steal my money, he began. She attempted to steal my bond with my mother, my self-worth, and my future. She isolated me from the one individual who truly had my best interests at heart, convincing me that my mother's concern was control, that her wisdom was interference. I watched Jessica's face as my son spoke. For the first time, her composed facade slipped, revealing a flicker of genuine feeling, perhaps surprise, at the strength in Richard's voice. But here is what she did not account for, Richard continued. She did not expect that my mother would advocate for me. She did not expect that the woman she dismissed as a meddling old lady would be the one to expose her. And she certainly did not expect that her actions would ultimately make me stronger, more independent, and more appreciative of authentic affection than I have ever been. Pride swelled in my chest as Richard concluded his statement by addressing Jessica directly. You thought you were ruining me. But you actually liberated me. Free from dependence, free from immaturity, free to finally become the man my mother always knew I could be. As Richard returned to his seat beside me, I squeezed his hand. Mrs. Patel nodded, indicating it was my turn. I approached the podium, standing tall despite my 73 years. Your Honor, I began, I appear before you not just as Richard Watson's parent, but as a woman who has lived long enough to identify predators like Jessica Simmons. She selected my son because she perceived vulnerability. She targeted our household because she believed we would be easy prey. I paused, making deliberate eye contact with Jessica. Her error was assuming that age diminishes us, that a 73-year-old woman would not possess the strength, the resources, or the resolve to retaliate. She underestimated not only a mother's devotion, but a lifetime of hard-won discernment. The courtroom remained silent as I proceeded. I do not seek retribution, Your Honor. What I desire is protection for other households, other offspring, other parents who might fall victim to someone like Jessica Simmons. I seek accountability that aligns with the calculated nature of her offenses. When I finished and returned to my seat, Richard leaned over. That was extraordinary, Mother, he whispered. You did not even mention how she disgraced you that day in the house. Some triumphs do not require verbal declaration, I replied softly. She knows what she did, and she knows who prevailed. The judge sentenced Jessica to 8 years in federal prison, plus restitution to all her victims. As the courtroom began to clear, Jessica was led past our row in restraints. She paused briefly, her eyes meeting mine once more. You were correct about the house, she said quietly, a hint of her former defiance showing. I stood to face her directly, no longer the disgraced woman who had left my house that day. Almost does not count, Jennifer, I replied, intentionally using her false name, and he was never yours to possess. The officers led her away, and Richard and I walked out of the courthouse into the bright winter sun, both standing taller than we had in years. Spring arrived with a surge of renewal. The plea agreement had spared us a lengthy trial, allowing both Richard and me to focus on reconstructing our lives. In the 4 months since Jessica's sentencing, remarkable developments had emerged. Richard continued his work at the bookstore, but had recently been promoted to assistant manager. His apartment above Mrs. Calloway's garage, once a temporary haven, was now a comfortable home adorned with second-hand treasures and bookshelves he had constructed himself. Most importantly, he was attending community college evening classes in accounting, a practical skill he discovered an aptitude for while organizing the bookstore's financial records. As for me, I had followed Richard's counsel and used some of the remaining insurance funds for myself. I joined a local senior hiking group, enrolled in a watercolor course, and even planned a summer voyage to the coast, something I had envisioned for years but consistently postponed. Today, however, was significant for a different reason. Richard and I stood on the front lawn of my rental property, the house where he and Jessica had resided, the site of my humiliation and eventual victory. Are you certain about this, Mother? Richard inquired, watching the real estate agent drive the for sale sign into the soft spring ground. I nodded confidently. Absolutely. This house has fulfilled its purpose in our lives. It is time for a fresh beginning. The property had stood unoccupied since Jessica's departure. Despite professional cleaning, I could not bring myself to lease it again. Too many negative memories lingered in those rooms. Selling it would not only purge those recollections, but would provide funds for Richard's education and my own future security. Mrs. Watson, the real estate agent, approached with a clipboard in hand. I have scheduled the first open house for this weekend. Given the neighborhood and the market, I anticipate significant interest. I signed the necessary documents, feeling a burden lift from my shoulders with each signature. This house, once a source of income, then a source of contention, now a reminder of painful times, would soon belong to someone else. A family who would create new, happier memories within its confines. As we drove away, Richard glanced back at the property. It is peculiar. For a while, that place felt like everything I had ever desired. My own home, a beautiful partner, autonomy from you. He smiled apologetically. Now I can see it was all an illusion. Not all of it, I corrected him. Your aspiration for independence was genuine and healthy. It was merely built on a false foundation. We continued to my house, our customary Saturday destination for the past few months. Richard had established a custom of preparing dinner for me once a week, his culinary abilities improving with each attempt. Tonight's menu was his most ambitious yet. A roast with vegetables and freshly baked bread. As he worked in the kitchen, confident, focused, occasionally consulting a recipe, but mostly relying on his developing intuition, I marveled at the transformation. This was not the same man who had permitted Jessica to verbally abuse his mother and expel her from a house that was not even theirs. This was someone new, or perhaps someone who had been there all along, buried beneath layers of dependence and immaturity. You are staring, mother, Richard observed without looking up from the vegetables he was chopping. Just admiring the view, I replied with a smile. It is not every day a mother gets to witness her son thrive before her eyes. He set down his blade and turned to face me. I have been thinking a great deal about that day when Jennifer threw you out. I keep wondering why I did not stop her, why I simply stood there. The anguish in his eyes was evident, and I resisted the urge to dismiss his concerns with trite remarks. Why do you believe you did not? I asked instead. Richard leaned against the counter, considering the question thoughtfully. I think I was terrified of losing her. She had convinced me that she was my sole opportunity for happiness, for being a true man, and I believed that meant separating from you, proving I no longer required my mother. He shook his head regretfully. What I did not comprehend was that genuine independence does not mean severing ties with people. It means constructing healthy relationships from a position of strength, not reliance. His insight took my breath away. That is remarkably self-aware, Richard. He smiled slightly. Well, therapy helps. So does that support group. He returned to his chopping. One of the men there said something that stayed with me. True strength is not demonstrated by who you push away, but by who you are strong enough to keep close. I blinked back unexpected tears, touched by his growth and the implications for our bond. We were building something new, a mother-son connection founded on mutual respect rather than dependence and enabling. As we sat down to dinner later, the roast perfectly cooked and the bread still warm, Richard raised his glass in a toast. To fresh starts, he said, and to the strongest woman I know, who never abandoned me, even when I abandoned her. I clinked my glass against his, my heart full. To fresh starts, I echoed. 1 year after Jennifer's dramatic departure from our lives, I sat in the audience of the community college auditorium, watching with unconcealed pride as Richard walked across the stage to receive his accounting certification. At 36, he was older than most of his fellow students, but his face beamed with an achievement earned entirely through his own efforts. Richard Watson, Certificate in Accounting with Honors, the dean announced. And I found myself on my feet applauding with an enthusiasm that made Richard shake his head in feigned embarrassment. After the ceremony, we gathered with a small group Mrs. Calloway, Richard's supervisor from the bookstore, and 2 friends from his support group for a celebratory meal at a local restaurant. I had offered to host at my residence, but Richard had insisted on treating everyone. Mother, he said, raising his glass once everyone was served. I know I am supposed to thank the Academy and all that, but truly, I need to thank you, not just for your assistance this past year, but for advocating for me when I could not advocate for myself. Here, said Mrs. Calloway, raising her glass. Margaret is a formidable individual. As dinner progressed, I noticed Richard checking his wristwatch several times. Are we detaining you from something? I inquired quietly when the others were engaged in conversation. Actually, he said with an enigmatic smile, there is somewhere I would like to take you after dinner, if you are amenable to a small surprise. Intrigued, I consented. After we had bid farewell to the others, Richard drove us through familiar neighborhoods until we turned onto the street where my rental property, now sold, was situated. Richard, I questioned as he parked across the street from the house. Why are we here? Just wait, he said, checking his watch again. Perfect timing. As we sat in the car, a moving vehicle pulled up to the house. A young couple emerged from inside, followed by two small children who ran around the front yard with the boundless energy of youth. The new proprietors of my former asset were clearly in the process of relocating. I do not understand, I said, turning to Richard. His expression was thoughtful as he observed the family. I researched them after you mentioned the house had sold. He is a firefighter. She is a nurse. Those children are 4 and 6. He turned to me. They are a real family, Mother. A good family, and they are going to fill that house with affection and mirth and recollections that will completely erase what transpired there with Jennifer. Tears pricked my eyes as I grasped the significance of this moment for him. You are giving the house a fresh start in your perception. He nodded. Our narrative with Jennifer could have concluded so differently. She could have taken everything, the house, the money, perhaps even permanently destroyed our connection. Instead, look at all that has blossomed from that dreadful day. I watched as the father lifted one of the children onto his shoulders, the child's delighted cry carrying across the street. They seem content, I observed. They are, Richard confirmed. And so are we, aren't we? Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, we sat in comfortable silence for a few more minutes, watching the new family commence their life in the house that had once been the setting for our darkest periods. There was something profoundly healing about witnessing this shift from a place of sorrow to a place of new beginnings. As Richard drove us home, he seemed to have one more surprise in mind. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket at a stoplight. He produced a small velvet container. Richard, what? Open it, he encouraged. Inside was a delicate silver wristband with a single charm, a miniature house. I had it custom made, he explained, to remind us both that a house is merely a structure. It is the individuals within who make it a home. The sentiment moved me deeply. It is beautiful, I said, allowing him to secure it around my wrist. There is one more thing, he said as we pulled into my driveway. I have been offered a full-time role at an accounting firm. It is entry-level, but with my certificate and the partner's endorsement from the bookstore accounts I have been managing, they are taking a chance on me. Richard, that is wonderful news, I exclaimed. It means I will finally be completely financially self-sufficient, he continued. No more assistance required. And he paused. I found an apartment closer to the firm, a proper apartment, not just a room above a garage. I felt a momentary pang at the idea of him moving further away, but it was quickly replaced by genuine happiness for his advancement. You have progressed so far, I said softly. I am so proud of the man you have become. I am proud of him too, Richard replied with a smile. And I have you to thank for never giving up on him, even when he was buried under years of immaturity and poor decisions. As we walked to my front door, I glanced at the silver wristband gleaming on my arm. Jennifer had tried to banish me from a house that was legally mine, but in doing so, she had unintentionally helped us forge something far more precious, a bond that no one could ever sever. 18 months after Jennifer's sentencing, I received an unexpected phone call from Mrs. Patel, the prosecutor who had overseen her case. Watson, she began, I wanted to inform you personally, rather than having you learn it elsewhere. Jessica Simmons is being transferred to a minimum security facility. Her cooperation with authorities has led to the identification and apprehension of several other members of her fraud network. I absorbed this information calmly, surprised by my own absence of anger or worry. Thank you for letting me know. No, nothing at all. She still has years remaining on her sentence, and the restraining order remains permanently in effect. I simply thought you deserved to know, given how vital your evidence was in the proceedings. After ending the call, I contacted Richard at his office to relay the news. How do you feel about it? He asked. Oddly at peace, I admitted. She seems very distant from our lives now. She is, Richard confirmed. In every conceivable manner. That evening, Richard arrived with takeout from our preferred restaurant. A small celebration, he explained, for a milestone in his own existence. He had been dating Sarah, a quiet, thoughtful librarian he had met through the bookstore, for 6 months now. I have told her everything, he said as we ate, about Jennifer, about my financial irresponsibility, about how I disappointed you. All of it. That must have been challenging, I observed, noting the calm assurance in his demeanor. It was necessary, he corrected. Sarah deserves to know who I truly am. Not just who I am now, but how I arrived here. And something remarkable occurred. Mother. When I finished recounting everything to her, she said she respected me more for it, not less. I smiled, recognizing the healthy foundation he was constructing. She sounds like a perceptive woman. She is, and she wishes to meet you properly, not just the brief introductions we have had. She suggested Sunday dinner next week if you are available. I would like that very much. I agreed. Later, as we cleared the dishes together, a simple domestic chore that had somehow become a symbol of our new, more balanced connection, Richard grew thoughtful. You know, I have been thinking about what you said that day in court, about how Jennifer underestimated you because of your age. He placed a plate in the drying rack. I did the same thing, in a way. I saw you as just mother, someone to rebel against or depend on, but never truly an individual in your own right. The observation touched me. That is a common experience between parents and children. I think we get confined to roles and forget to fully perceive each other. Well, I perceive you now, he said simply, and I am astonished by what I see. You rebuilt your existence after father passed, raised me independently, managed your properties, and then possessed the fortitude to fight for me when I could not fight for myself. You are extraordinary, Mother. I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the hot dishwater. For so long, I had defined myself primarily as Richard's mother, evaluating my triumph or failure by his well-being. Now at 74, I was being seen, truly seen, for all that I was. You know? I said carefully. When Jennifer shrieked at me to exit her house that day, something fractured within me. Not just my heart over your perceived betrayal, but something deeper. My identity. Perhaps I felt trivial. Expendable. Richard stopped washing, turning to face me completely. I am so sorry, Mother. No, allow me to finish, I continued. That moment, as painful as it was, compelled me to reclaim myself, to remember that I am more than someone's mother or someone's victim. I am Margaret Watson, and I have lived a life of significance. Richard's eyes glimmered with understanding. You certainly have. And now I am living a life of deliberate choice, I added. My hiking group, my watercolor classes, my trip to the coast, these are not just pastimes, they are declarations of my selfhood. To Margaret Watson, Richard said, raising a soapy hand in a mock toast. A woman of consequence and determination. I laughed, flicking water at him playfully. The kitchen, once a place where I had worked alone, preparing meals for a son who took them for granted, was now a space of shared happiness and mutual appreciation. Later that night, after Richard had gone home to his new apartment, I sat on my porch watching fireflies dance in the summer twilight. My phone vibrated with a text message, a photograph from Richard showing a small velvet box containing a modest but elegant engagement ring. Not yet, the message read. But soon. Wanted you to be the first to know. I smiled, typing back my enthusiastic approval. As I set the phone down, I caught sight of the silver wristband on my arm, the tiny house charm catching the last light of day. Jennifer had tried to expel me, thinking she could erase me from my son's existence. Instead, she had unintentionally secured my place in it forever, not as a support or a source of funds, but as a mother cherished for her strength, wisdom, and steadfast affection. 2 years to the day after Jennifer shrieked at me to exit her house, I stood in the garden of Richard and Sarah's new home, surrounded by their closest friends and family. At 75, I had never felt more vibrant or more valued. "Mother," Richard called, approaching with Sarah on his arm. "We wished to show you something before the other guests arrived." They led me to a secluded corner of the garden, where a small stone bench sat beneath a flowering dogwood tree. A discreet plaque on the bench read, "For Margaret Watson, who taught us that true strength comes from within. It is our wedding gift to you," Sarah explained, her gentle eyes warm with genuine warmth. "A place that is always yours in our home." Tears threatened, but I blinked them away, not wanting to smudge my carefully applied cosmetics. "It is perfect," I managed, touching the engraved plaque with respectful fingers. The garden filled gradually with guests for the intimate wedding ceremony. Richard, handsome in his tailored suit, stood tall and confident, a man fully developed, no longer the boy who had sheltered behind my protection or Jennifer's manipulation. As the mother of the groom, I had been given a place of honor in the front row. But when the officiant asked, "Who presents this man in marriage?" Richard had surprised everyone with a departure from custom. "I present myself," he answered clearly. Then, turning to me with a smile, he added, "With gratitude to my mother, who instructed me how to stand on my own." The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity and authenticity. When Richard and Sarah exchanged vows they had composed themselves, I heard echoes of the hard-earned wisdom that had brought us all to this moment. "I promise to perceive you fully," Richard vowed to Sarah, "not as an extension of myself or a solution to my difficulties, but as your own complete individual." At the reception, I found myself approached by a distinguished gentleman who introduced himself as Sarah's father. "Mrs. Watson," he said warmly, "I have heard so much about you from both Sarah and Richard. Your son speaks of you with such admiration." "Please call me Margaret," I replied. "And I am equally impressed with the remarkable woman you nurtured." "They are good for each other," he observed, watching the newlyweds greet their guests. "Balanced, equal." "Yes," I agreed. "That is precisely correct." Later, during the traditional mother-son dance, Richard led me onto the floor with graceful assurance. "Content?" I asked as we moved to the gentle music. "Beyond words," he replied. "You know, I was thinking about Jennifer earlier." I raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Really? Today? Of all days?" He nodded thoughtfully. I realized something. In her own twisted way, she granted me the greatest gift imaginable. If she had not pushed me to that breaking point, if she had not humiliated you that day, I might never have discovered the fortitude to change. I might still be that reliant, immature man exploiting your generosity. Perhaps, I allowed, but I prefer to believe that you possessed that strength within you all along. It merely needed the appropriate catalyst to emerge. The music continued, and Richard glanced over to where Sarah was dancing with her father. "She perceives me clearly," he said softly. "All of me, the good and the bad, the strong and the weak, and she loves me anyway." "That is what genuine affection looks like," I agreed. "Not the fantasy Jennifer offered you, but the authentic connection you have built with Sarah." As the dance concluded, Richard embraced me tightly. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." The remainder of the reception passed in a blur of happiness and celebration. When it was time for the newlyweds to depart for their honeymoon, guests gathered to shower them with flower petals. Richard sought me out one last time, pressing something into my hand. "What is this?" I asked, looking down at a small key. "To our house," he explained. "Sarah and I want you to know you are always welcome, not as a visitor, but as family." No one will ever tell you to leave again. I closed my fingers around the key, its symbolic weight far greater than its physical presence. I will cherish this, I promised. But you know I will always call before visiting. He laughed. A sound free from the insecurity that had troubled him for so long. I would expect nothing less from Margaret Watson, woman of principle. As I watched their vehicle vanish down the driveway, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us here. 2 years ago, Jennifer Stevens had shrieked at me to exit what she believed was her house, never imagining that her cruelty would initiate a transformation that would ultimately lead to this day of joy and genuine connection. I sat on my stone bench as the other guests began to depart, feeling the pleasant weight of the key in my palm and the warmth of the afternoon sun on my face. At 75, I had discovered that life's most challenging moments often serve as gateways to its greatest blessings, if only we possess the courage to traverse them. Jennifer had profoundly underestimated the power of a determined older woman. She had confused age for frailty, wisdom for meddling, and maternal love for dominance. Her most significant miscalculation, however, had been believing she could alienate me from what was rightfully mine. Not just a dwelling, but my relationship with my son. Thank you for listening. Do not forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters.